All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight at the April 6th, 2026 Town Board Workshop. Please rise for the pledge. United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Good to be back here. I graduated in 1990 something. So thank you for joining us here tonight. East Fishkill has partnered with our New York State Assemblyman and Neil Beaton for this forum. Thank you to our Wappinger Central School Superintendent, Dr. Dwight Bonk, and our John Jay Principal, David Tesalawa, for having the facility here available for us. Thank you, thank you. On behalf of the town board, I'm the supervisor, and we welcome our neighbor from town of Wappinger, Joe Cavassini, to this nice event tonight to discuss pressing issues that's facing our residents today, the cost of energy. We all know that it's not an abstract issue. It's something that we see, it's very real. We see every single month in your electric bills, in your heating costs, and the broader cost of living, right? Many families, businesses, seniors on fixed incomes, energy affordability has become a real and growing concern. So we want to get some answers to some questions that many people have. That's why we felt it was critical to get some key stakeholders here tonight. Someone who sometimes helps with policy, someone who operates our electric grid, someone who delivers the energy, and most importantly, all of you, the residents. So tonight's about transparency, understanding, and constructive dialogue. I'd like to begin by thanking our representatives here, our Assemblyman A.J. Beaton, our town board, Councilman Tom Franco, Amelia Marinaro, Councilman Craig Arco, and Marian Flores, and our supervisor from Wappinger, Joe Cavassini. Thank you all for being here for the important meeting that is very important to the concerns of our residents. And importantly, we have representatives from New York ISO, that's the New York Independent System Operator. That's the organization that runs New York's electric grid and the wholesale electricity markets. And that's pretty much, you could think of them as like an air traffic controller for the electricity across the state. Joining us by Zoom is Mr. Kevin Lanahan, and from Central Hudson Gas and Electric, here tonight to answer some questions, give us some insight on billing and infrastructure, and we do have, they do have some of their staff in the lobby to answer individual concerns that if anybody has, please see them in the lobby afterwards. Mr. Jerry Nappy, Director of Public Relations, and Joe Jenkins, Senior Manager of Media Relations. So thank you all for being here as well. So the purpose for tonight is to provide clarity on why energy costs are rising, and what policies and factors are driving those increases, and what can be done both now and for the future. How can we address those costs? It's a combination, a lot of forces at play here. State energy policies and mandates, infrastructure upgrades and grid modernization, fuel costs, market conditions, transition from grid to renewable energy sources, and utility delivery costs and rate structures. These are complex topics, and they're often have a lot of differing perspectives on both the causes and the solutions. So that's why we have experts here to answer questions and give us clarity on them. So I just want to be sure that everybody understands this is not about finger pointing. It's about understanding the system and having a constructive dialogue. We want to make sure that everybody who comes up to the podium, comes up to the microphone to answer your questions, please just be respectful, focused, and constructive. That's all I ask. Our feedback that we have been getting from a lot of residents, a lot of questions are, why are my electric bills increasing so significantly? What role do state policies play in these costs? What is Central Hudson responsible versus the broader market forces? Are there ways to reduce the costs in the short term? And what is the future of energy? How does that look like for our region? All important questions. We will begin with our Assemblyman to say a few words, then we will have a presentation from New York ISO, and then Central Hudson, and then a discussion with our panel, and then questions from the audience. So without further ado, Assemblyman Bepan, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Supervisor. Well, thank you, Supervisor. It's good to be back here at my alma mater, John Jay High School. I think I graduated a little bit after you did. But thank you all for coming out tonight, because the cost of electricity, utilities, gas, whatever it may be, is something that is at the top of mind for everyone across our district and, of course, New York State. And there's a number of different driving factors as to why our cost of energy has gone up, be it things happening internationally and at the federal level, but also New York State has a role to play in the increased costs that you're seeing right now. A number of different policies was passed by New York over the years, including things like the CLCPA and others, which one of my staffers, Jen, is going to hand out a memo from New York's very own NYSERDA talking about the impact that, for instance, the CLCPA is going to have on residents going forward. And these are real New York State policies. It's not politics. It's things that are already put in play by New York State. And these are things that we're trying to address right now in the state budget. For those of you who follow the state budget, it is late. It's been late every single year for the past 6 years. And that's because there's a number of different policy items that's currently up for debate. Number one is whether or not they're going to keep the CLCPA in place as it is. From this memo that you're going to see that Jen's handing out, you're looking at another $2 added to your average cost of gasoline. You are looking at even more added to the cost of home natural gas and heating oil and other things that'll have a significant impact on you individually. So, there's a number of us across the legislature that's supporting changing the timeline for the CLCPA, delaying it, and other things that's happening in Albany. So that's just one aspect here, but the folks that can really talk about this in greater detail are our friends from ISO, and also our friends from Central Hudson are going to talk about some of the cost-saving things that they're working on for future cases. As I'm sure you all know, the grid is regulated by the Public Service Commission. Nothing really happens or is allowed to happen unless it's approved by the Public Service Commission, which is why from time to time, when rate cases come up, you'll see many of your representatives oppose increases because, we don't want to see things go forward, whether it's driving that policy or is need for upgrades to the infrastructure, whatever it may be. We understand that the utility companies have to survive and keep expanding, pay their employees. We're here looking out for the amount that you're paying for utilities. So, we work with the Public Service Commission to try to address a lot of that, but of course it's negotiation. So, we end up somewhere right in the middle. It's a very antiquated system that they're operating here in New York when it comes to utility negotiations and rate setting. So these are just other things that we're all just kind of looking at to change the future, to make it a bit more adaptable, but understanding of where we are as a community and as a state, that we can't just keep raising rates. It's not going to work in the long run. So because my colleague for the independent systems operator is on a tight timeline, I want to turn it over to him just to give a brief presentation from the grid aspect. And he can kind of talk about some of the intricacies that go into supply and where energy comes from. So Kevin, I don't know if you can hear us.
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Well, the show is yours.
Okay, so I'm going to try and work with technology here, share my screen. First, I'd like to say thank you to Assemblyman Bepan for the invitation to be with you tonight. And I'll also note that the supervisor really nailed it. That introduction really covers it well in terms of itemizing the several different factors that are influencing your bill ultimately. I'm going to, we see our screen at this point?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through a slide deck that usually takes me a good half an hour, and I'm going to try and do my best to cover the essential elements so that people have an understanding, first of all, of what we do. Let's see, how do I change these slides from here? There we go. Okay. Hopefully the slides are changing on the screen in your room there.
All good.
Okay. So what do we do at the New York Independent System Operator? We are responsible for operating the high voltage system. So that means that we are dispatching or directing the over 450 generating assets across the state of New York, taking that energy that they produce and making decisions about which transmission lines to place that energy on to deliver it down to various different electric utilities across the state so that they can serve directly the customer. We do not serve the customer directly, but we monitor that whole high voltage system and operate it so that the distribution utilities, in this case, Central Hudson, and hello to my friends that are there from Central Hudson today, so that they can serve the customer as reliably as possible. We also are administering or overseeing the competitive electric markets where the commodity of electricity is bought and sold. That is the cost that's derived inside of the competitive electric markets has been responsible, that supply side has been responsible for the increase in the bills that you've been experiencing since February. We're going to cover that later in the presentation. But our goal is to make sure that the market participants inside of those markets are performing according to the rules and regulations, and nobody is taking financial positions that can drive up the costs unduly. So we are policing those markets and making sure they run fairly, but also making sure that everybody that's operating in those markets does so according to the rules. And if we find that they are not, we have the ability to perform ultimately an investigation and fine people out of those markets. We also are responsible for planning for the investment needs on the electric system on a 5 to 10 year basis. So we've got a lot of smart planning engineers and economists that are continuously poring over a lot of data from various different sources. The utilities themselves give us data. The state of New York, NYSERDA, the Energy Research and Development Authority gives us data. We purchase some from places like Moody's and Standard & Poor's. We're capturing data from the Federal Energy Information Administration. They're constantly looking at how the system is performing and behaving under this great transition to more renewables that we're seeing, and then identifying where the reliability risks are. Do we have enough generation to serve our needs in the next 5 to 10 years? Is the transmission system operating the way that we expect it to? And how is new technology like new renewable resources, how is that changing the way that consumers are using electricity, and what investment needs are necessary to keep the system running reliably on a 5 to 10 year basis? What are the key conclusions that we find when we pour over all that data? First, electrification of both building and the transportation is driving future demand. We're experiencing that now as we watch the consumer demand on the system during really cold events, really hot events. But also in the future, we are expecting a lot of large loads to drive up the increased consumer demand. These are the data centers, of course, but also chip manufacturing facilities are expected to drive projected demand higher. We are seeing also some traditional manufacturing start to be interested in New York. I'll give you one example. Out in central New York, the Chobani Motor facility is looking to add a couple of lines to their processing facility. So all of this is fleet. The machines that we're expecting to deliver that energy for us are getting older, and we are seeing a lot of retirements. We're also, as a state policy, we've also driven out a lot of generation for different reasons, emissions, environmental climate reasons, but also safety reasons. We exited Indian Point a few years ago at 2,000 megawatts. And together, these forces are really creating a situation where we are concerned about the number of the amount of energy reserves that we have in the system in order to serve that increased future customer demand that we're experiencing and seeing in the data. When I talk about aging generation, we are relying on certain machines and certain units, most of which are in New York City, some of which are in the Hudson Valley, fewer of which are in upstate New York, but they do exist, that are 50, 60, 70 plus years or older. These machines are breaking down more often when peak demand is at its highest, and we're relying on these units to serve that demand, which also is having an upward impact on the cost of electricity in real time that consumers are experiencing. When I talk about the retirement of generation, you would say, okay, but aren't we bringing on a new generation to fill that gap? And the short answer is, we have made some progress in terms of bringing new generation on, but it's roughly 2-to-1 with the units in the megawatts that we're losing, as you see in that chart, those two arrows in the chart on the right, to the new generating units that we're bringing online. It's also important to keep in mind that the new generation that we're connecting, as we lose the traditional generation, is renewable almost exclusively, which means that we really need 3 megawatts of that renewable supply to make up for 1 megawatt that we lose in the traditional fossil dispatchable generation. The reliability benefit, the reliability contribution that an intermittent resource like wind or solar provides is a lot less on balance than that traditional fossil fuel generation. And so if we're only adding roughly half of the megawatts that we're losing, as you see from that chart on the right, we're really losing much more in terms of the capacity that we can get from those units. This chart demonstrates for us that all things being equal, summer demand going forward based on our estimates of the data for the next 10, 20 years would actually go down because we're assessing some population loss and we're looking at energy efficiency programs being effective. But when we layer on electrification of the transportation sectors and more EV vehicles, when we layer on heat pumps for our cooling purposes in summer, you can see that we do expect some modest increased demand. However, that doesn't tell us the real story, because when we factor in large loads, we see a very different reliability dynamic going forward, increased consumer demand in summer because of data centers, expected economic development, as we were talking before. And even in winters, and even a bigger reliability challenge going forward, because we're expecting EV demand in winter with regard to charging overnight to be a challenge, but then also building electrification where more people are installing heat pumps for space heating to drive up consumer demand and create a significant challenge for us. I just mentioned that we do have a responsibility for reviewing the reliability factors of new generating facilities that want to connect to the system. We look at where they want to connect on the electric system. We want to review their plans and make sure that they can do so reliably and safely. And we have, in the last 5 or 6 years, approved just over 14,000 megawatts of new supply. And that's a good news story. However, if you look at that red number at the top, there are roughly 3,500 megawatts of new supply. Of that, 14,300 have actually broken ground. And so we have to ask ourselves the question of, if we're approving new wind resources, new battery storage facilities to make up for and to serve that future demand, why are only 3,500 megawatts of those projects moving forward to put steel in the ground? And the answer is because of definitely certain econometrics that are well beyond our control. The increase of the inflationary increase on supplies, the cost of labor, the cost of borrowing, et cetera, is, we think, really presented a real headwind for developers in terms of moving forward and putting steel in the ground here in New York. I'm going to jump to a couple of slides that discuss price, because I know that's what's on everybody's mind as the supervisor highlighted, and the assembly member highlighted at the beginning. So let's take a look at what the major cost drivers that we see. And we look at not just national data, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, but we're looking at international econometrics and global geopolitical events and the pressures that has on certain commodities that can impact us back here. And certainly higher fuel prices, especially natural gas, the impacts of the last two wars, the one in Iran, and certainly the impacts of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia have had impacts on the global natural gas commodity. That natural gas price has impacted the cost of electricity generation here in New York because it is still the main fuel to generate megawatts that the consumers are looking for when it gets really hot or really cold. We also are, as a nation, chosen to export a great amount of liquid natural gas to Europe that's being purchased in to make up for not being able to purchase gas from Russia. So Western Europe has benefited from our liquid natural gas exports, and that high demand on a global basis impacts our national supply here and has driven up the cost of the price of producing megawatts from that fossil fuel fleet. We haven't really talked about, but it certainly is another cost driver, extreme weather events. We did see a more traditional summer last year and more hot weather days that threatened breaking some of our historic peaks in the state. When weather is that hot for an extended period of time, and we have an aging fleet that is less reliable, breaks down more, we have to go in those moments and find emergency megawatts to serve the consumer demand. That means the price is going up during that hot weather event. Just like summer and winter, when it's cold for an extended period of time, we just experienced that in February. We also experienced those aging generation units being less reliable, and we had to go find megawatts to serve the rising consumer demand. Again, in real time, because the cost of natural gas was up across the eastern half of the country, buying gas on the spot market to produce those emergency megawatts to serve the consumer demand when it was 0 degrees outside, and the price went up considerably. So, just point that out, that the aging system plus the increased demand has definitely had an upward effect, and when it gets really cold, it drives the price even higher. And that's why consumers and some of your constituents are calling you about their February and March bills. If we take a quick look, and we worked on this slide with National Grid, and this is not Central Hudson example, but we worked on this with National Grid. There's a lot of different elements here. This is the last slide before I end, and I don't know if there's questions that I can take, and I'm happy to do so. I want everybody to focus on the darkest shade of blue. What that refers to is the requirement of the utilities to go out long before the weather gets really hot or long before the weather gets really cold and secure their electricity commodity to serve their customers well in advance when the price is low. It's a consumer protection. It's mandated by the Public Service Commission that the utilities go out long before we have that extreme weather, and we can expect there to be price volatility, and they secure that supply for bilateral contracts for a lower price to serve their customers. The market exposed supply is that shade to the right, little lighter blue shade, and so roughly 14% of the total supply bill, which is roughly about 45% of the entire electric bill that the consumer is going to open, is exposed to those swings. So it's not the entire supply side of the bill, it is a smaller subset of it. But when the bill, whether it's really cold and the price of natural gas spikes as it did, and therefore impacts the price of electricity that's going to show up on the bill, it is that smaller pie shade, lighter blue that you see there. And we do our best running the markets to make sure that the supply is there if the consumer needs it at the most efficient cost. But it's hard to find an efficient cost in real time when it gets really cold out, and we are still relying on those aging units that I mentioned, and we're not connecting enough of the new supply that can help bring the price down, but then also, from our point of view, meet the reliability needs of the system. So I know that was a quick overview of some complex slides. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
So I have a question to begin with. I want to thank you for the presentation that you made. I want to thank you for the presentation that you made. You've been talking a lot about infrastructure and investment. So we have some issues, and I understand that politics and delivering of energy is close connected. So in 2021, for this region, the Hudson Valley, there was a shutdown media point. At that point, this community over here, we had global salaries, we had IBM, that they were drawing a lot of energy. This community never experienced the high price that we experienced in the last few years since the shutdown of the energy. I have also followed online a delivery from ISO nationwide talking about energy delivery in a different part of the United States. And the East Coast has been affected the most, especially during cold times this winter. So we apparently bring our liquid gas from down south. Talking about infrastructures, other states have reservoir or tanks that they fill during the slow time of year when there is an abundance of liquid gas, which stores energy for the winter times. Apparently the East Coast, especially New York State, has no such facility. And that has created, through the fact that we had winter times and the lines were frozen, we talked about extreme temperature for almost a month. This has created a depletion of the supply in liquid gas, which is the way that we create energy during winter times. You've been talking about an energy system. My question is also, if we decide to shut down Indian Point without addressing how we want to create new energy source, if we really serve that community problem, if we serve that taxpayers problem, when we come and tell people who receive, unfortunately, this has created a catastrophe and an emergency for our community. When we deliver energy and we tell them this is your bill, and many times what we experienced this year is that, for instance, somebody that paid $60 to $80 in actual energy costs, has seen it under delivery charge 3 times that amount. And when they called Central Hudson, who's our local, they said that that amount is going for future infrastructure. To me, this has been a failure, a big failure, whether it's been whoever. I cannot accuse ISO of this, but definitely our political system. Planning is an issue that right now it's ongoing, and I don't know if you have, I'm talking about renewable energy. And at the end of the day, renewable energy, what is the cost of renewable energy to the taxpayer? And if we realize what the production of renewable energy is to the consumer, is very limited. So we have created an intentional catastrophe. I don't know if you could address these points.
I'll talk about that. So, first thing I'll mention is you were talking about natural gas commodities. So, the other element that we have to keep in mind is that we, as a state, we're almost the last terms of getting delivery of the natural gas commodity. It comes up roughly from Gulf and Louisiana area. So by the time we get the gas, it's at a higher cost. Merely for the transportation. It also comes down there to the Rockies, Canadian Rockies, and getting it across. So in both cases, that infrastructure we're second last in getting that commodity. So it tends to be higher purchase, especially in those cold weather events. We're definitely missing the exit, not just sort of Indian Point, but other units that have retired in the last couple of years. Less instable laws of supply and demand, less supply with demand going up and not connecting enough new supply in the system is that upward impact on the cost of electricity. We have no, ISO, our jobs to, like I said, run the markets, run the system itself, plan for future investments, but we have no regulatory powers. We're not a state agency, we're not a federal agency, we're independent, highly regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Public Service Commission, and several other reliability organizations, but we have no ability to compel a unit to connect or disconnect on the system. Our role is to serve the system as we have it. The markets, we believe, do send a healthy signal for that investment and the investment needs that we're experiencing now. But there are certain, and you talked about some regulatory and statutory headwinds that, as we understand from talking to developers and resources, are giving them pause about investing here in the world.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is going on and on. Sorry about that. My question is, so if the difference between energy produced upstate compared to Hudson Valley.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
We're having a little difficulty with the microphone. The difference between energy produced upstate and Hudson Valley. Upstate is primarily nuclear and hydro. Upstate is usually, particularly nuclear and hydro, and Hudson Valley primarily natural gas. And I understand ISO, your job is to make sure that there's enough power flowing where it's needed, right? You have to make sure every second of the day there's enough demand, right? So my question is, if the retirement of generating power is outpacing new energy generation, in your opinion, would it have been prudent to not close Indian Point at this point, since we don't have enough megawatts to serve what we need, or not?
Well, when we were asked to provide an analysis at the time of whether or not Indian Point could close, there was the connection of two major gas plants in the Hudson Valley, CPV, and then Cricket Valley generating stations. So at the time, new supply was coming on. What we didn't have at that point was the increased demand that we've experienced recently. The other issue is, since we closed Indian Point, we've also exited almost 2,000 megawatts of other natural gas provided supply. Most of that was based in the city. So we didn't, as a state policy, we didn't stop at the closure of Indian Point. We then moved under DEC regulations to exit, like I said, almost 2,000 megawatts of other dispatchable supply. And at the same time, watched demand go up because of electric vehicles and electrification of the housing and building sector. So it's not just one element that brought us to this point on our system that we're experiencing now, it's several. Our message as the grid operator and the folks responsible for identifying what the investment needs are, our message as of late is the time to begin to build new resources of all types is right now. We're probably a little behind schedule in terms of meeting the needs that we see. And we've enjoyed in New York State a diverse set of resources, lots of, as you mentioned, lots of hydro, and this slide shows us. We have plenty of hydro upstate New York that we do, especially in times of high demand, are delivering to the Hudson Valley and down to New York City to meet consumer needs. Plenty of nuclear in upstate New York, and plenty of wind in upstate New York. We want to maintain that diversity of resources. We want to build all of that type of resource, along with the cleaner, cutting-edge natural gas facility technology that, for instance, GE Renova is producing right now in Schenectady, New York. It's predictable. It's what we call dispatchable. It's there when we call on it. It's flexible. It also will help us reduce emissions, not by 100%, of course, but 65%, some of the estimates. And then we want to build offshore wind. That is also very reliable, predictable. The offshore wind can be injected exactly where we need it to the major load centers of Long Island and New York City, for instance. So we want to build more of all of the resources. We're also going to have to upgrade our transmission system to deliver all of this capacity to where it's needed. Again, where the load centers are in the Hudson Valley, Long Island, and New York City.
So,
And I'll just point out that donut chart in the middle, that outer ring of green shows that most of the production of electricity in the upstate areas is almost emissions free. It's approaching 90% of the production of the units in upstate New York. And when I say upstate, we consider that to be the capital region, north and west. So when we think about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act and the mandate to decarbonize our electric system, most of the work, most of the older natural gas generation fleet is in Hudson Valley and New York City and Long Island. That is where we need to repower or replace those megawatts. That's the challenge.
I just want to touch upon one other concern. I know that you mentioned unexpected usage, but there is a document, as you well know, from 2019, which it was the CLP, whatever, it's the Green Energy Act. This document really spells it out, how the agenda for energy consumption in New York State was supposed to be. It is really hard when New York State imposes Wappingers School District, which we are in right now, to purchase school buses, electric school buses. And then we come to a community and say we didn't expect the consumption of energy to go up because of the electric cars. Something doesn't make sense. And some people in this community are just not going to buy into that. I'm just making a statement. I'm not just accusing anybody. Thank you.
I'll just make one quick comment on that. So, at the outset, our job is to look at that data and then make predictions. And so we immediately changed our planning process to adjust for when the CLCPA was passed in 2019 so that we could capture what we expected would be the quickly changing energy consumption landscape. So we've got a pretty strong record of the last 6 years of issuing these public reports that we're telling policymakers and market participants about the expectations for increased demand. This is just one chart. We'll run several scenarios so that we can see what the various different possibilities are with regard to development of resources, the expected increases in consumer demand. To be blunt, we've been warning about this situation that we find ourselves in today for the last 6 years with our planning scenarios. All of the results from our planning scenarios were published publicly.
I know that you're kind of tight on time, Kevin, so we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
There's a question in the crowd.
Oh, we have one question from the crowd.
Sounds good.
My name is Annette Astorino. My cousin, Bob Astorino, ran for governor and is county executive in Manchester. He predicted everything that's happening right now, he predicted years ago. He warned about closing Indian Point. I can tell you right now, I have solar, I went with solar a few years ago. And the reason I did that was because, I heard, I have brothers in Florida that have solar, and obviously you need sun for solar. Well, I found out this year that, it's not going to happen all the time. And even with electric vehicles, you're asking people to count on electricity for school buses, which is not 100%. The weather is not, there's only one person in charge of the weather, and he's not here, and he will never be here, but he's watching us. And to sit there and say that, first of all, we need heat in New York to live. Elderly need heat, small children need heat. I just saw a post the other day about Davis Furniture having an $18,000 electric bill in Central Hudson. Now, I don't know what normal businesses run, but I know my electric bill, since I've lived in Rockingers since 2018, basically doubled this year, and I have solar. It was $800. It's never been that with solar. And the reason that I figured out how it works is that it goes down a little bit. We have snow on the roof. My husband got on the roof to take off the snow so we could get some sun. But you know what? When it's cloudy every day, we're not getting sun. So electricity, heat, especially when heat is electricity, is non-negotiable as far as, prices. There should be a stop on, we're not going to take away your heat. We're not even going to raise it to a certain point. Food, heat, what do we need to survive in New York? Food, heat, shelter. Those are non-negotiable. Unless you want people moving out, which I've talked about to my husband. I said, if this gets worse, we may have a choice to move. And you're going to be left with a lot. I know on my one, just so I'm sure the Central Hudson is aware of this, and even if nobody else is aware of this, that CDC charge, that SBC charge on there, that's also for paying people who can't afford electricity. Why am I, as a working person who busts my butt every night, paying for someone else who can't afford it? And I have $800, maybe someone should pay for mine if I'm paying for somebody else.
Ma'am, do you have a question for the ISO?
Yeah, so what is your solution to lowering prices to what would be considered normal, reasonable electrical prices? Because what's happening right now is going to drive everybody out here. It's not an if, it's just a when.
Did you hear what she asked?
I did, yeah. And the situation we find ourselves in is definitely stark. We saw, as she just recounted for us, some historically high prices in February. I wish I could say that next winter we won't experience that again. I wish I could say this summer we won't experience that. But that is reflective of the lack of added supply and the exit of supply that has happened, as we've been talking about through this presentation the last several years. So we're now in a situation where the economics caught up with the reliability warnings that we were issuing the last several years. And the solution, there is no easy, swift solution, to be blunt. We, from our perspective, in watching how the markets are reacting to this situation and consumers are being impacted, the solution that we're advocating for is as quickly as possible to create the right incentives for the capital markets to show up here in New York, along with the development community, and build new supply. It will not work quickly to smooth the price out and change the imbalance between supply and demand that we're experiencing. But that is the long-term solution. We should hope for, but hope's not a plan, some less extreme weather. I did see in the real-time market price last week, minus $15.50 for the electricity commodity. So that was a day when it was sunny, so we were capturing some behind-the-meter solar, which helped depress the need for expensive generation elsewhere. It's a mild day, so the demand was down. And down to the point where the price was actually negative. So the markets work over a 12-month period of time to find the most efficient solution. But when we have that extreme imbalance between supply and demand, as you were recounting, we have incredibly cold weather where health and safety is now an issue. Unfortunately, we have to generate those models. And when I say we develop, the folks that are operating these power plants, they have to buy gas that's wildly expensive in order to produce those megawatts that the consumers demand at that moment. And that is driving the price up, not just here in New York, across the entire eastern seaboard, basically from east of the Mississippi over, across the United States during that week in February, experienced the same sort of price volatility that we did.
So when opening Indian Point again, lower those prices, since closing it, predicted exactly what's happening, should we open it? And you know what, politics aside, do what's best for the people and not for your pockets. I mean,
we're very curious about the discussions. We read them just like you do in the newspaper about the possibility that the decommissioning company that's has control of Indian Point now might be open to reversing course, but we don't have any information beyond what we've read in the newspaper. So I don't know if it can be paused and then turned around, but that was 2,000 megawatts of baseload generation in a critical part of the state that can't be debated.
Just to add to what Kevin said, I was just over at Indian Point with the Secretary of Energy. The current owners and those responsible for decommissioning the plant has completely stopped the decommission process. So now they're talking with anyone that'll listen to support potentially either reopening or reopening a portion of the plant. Where they're finding the biggest pushback is when the plant was shut down by the previous administration. There was a number of contingencies in play that included that the town supervisor, the village mayor, the school district superintendent, and the county executive all had to be in agreement to reopen the plant. As it stands, 2 out of the 4 of those are completely opposed to seeing that plant come back to fruition. So even if they had the resources, which I think they have access to funding right now, to reopen the plant, they're seeing a very strong uphill battle from the county executives and the school.
Political.
Part of it is political. Yeah.
I'm teaching as a private school, so I know the school buses thing. I mean, to actually think that school buses are going to electric is insane, to be honest. And honestly, an election year is coming up. I know for me, I'm going to vote for whoever's going to benefit my pocketbook, who's ever going to lower whoever's looking for the consumer's best interest and not the pocket, you know. So if you're lowering gas prices or you're getting something to lower energy prices, you got my vote. And if you're gonna just raise my taxes, you're not gonna vote, but you're gonna push me out of state and you're just gonna have less people to support your agenda, to be Democrats. Because we know that that's what they want. They want more people with money. All people think for something for the state. So, there's Republicans out there that because they wanted them, guys out of the league. Anyone who's for the people and literally working and visually and, with proof and everything, working to get our prices lower, that's what I'm going to do.
I just have a quick question for Kevin. This isn't me personally. We're pretty supportive of the governor's plan to essentially build new nuclear sites across the state. We kind of came out as a strong delegation from the Valley for that. How do you see that coming to play, and what other types of energy production do you think would be helpful here in the Hudson Valley in the meantime? Because, I mean, nuclear is looking like 10 years out. You know, we can't wait that long. You know, and with the situation happening in Point, that is really up to the executive at this point.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll be very specific, and I know that this isn't always popular with certain folks. If nuclear is 10 to 12 years away, and offshore wind is at great pause because of several different headwinds, we're starting to run out of options, and we're beginning to run out of time in terms of serving our reliability needs. So the quickest option, it would seem, is to repower those old fossil-based steamers that are 50, 60, 70 years old. The site is already there. They're already connected electrically. It would generally be less complicated to move those old generating machines out and then bring in the new, much cleaner, much more efficient, so less expensive to run units produced by GE. Wouldn't get us all the way to a decarbonized electric system. It would be a meaningful reduction in carbon output. It also would, as I said before, cost less to run, and it would start us on the path of meeting the concerning reliability needs that we see. But we should narrow ourselves to just that investment. We do need to look at offshore wind. From our perspective, that is albeit, also expensive. There are no cheap options here, but that is also a very reliable asset that we can count on near the New York City load. We also need to look at some of those distributed resources. Fuel cells, those nascent technologies, renewable gas, hydrogen-based technology. We want to look at it all, and that is our message going forward. We need to look at every viable resource, even those that may not be at scale yet, to serve the reliability needs that we see.
Just one last comment. At the end of the day, we have to use some common sense. We have created an emergency situation, and this is becoming a catastrophe for many people, including the seniors in our community. There are people right now that they cannot afford, and this is a stat from AARP, 40% of the seniors have not been able to buy medication because they have to pay for their electric bills. This is no longer one way or another. This is a survival mode that we need to go into. Thank you for everything, and thank you for your explanations.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I know these are tough issues. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you, sir. And now we will move on to Mr. Nappy and Mr. Jenkins from Central Hudson Gas and Electric. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Sorry, I think I'm the odd man out. I'm Fishkill guy, so I'm sorry. I apologize about that. But we do thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak to all of you about something that's very nuanced, but certainly a very real concern for everyone in this room. And we appreciate the time to speak to you tonight. So we did have a presentation. I'm not sure if that's going to be able to
I have one question. The SPC chart and CBC chart, like for those who have solar, it's CBC, for those who don't have solar, it's SPC, and the price ranges. When our electric bill is high or whatever, I mean, shouldn't that be an option for us to pay it? Because it does go to low income households, which is, unfortunately, it kind of stinks that they, aren't working to get from the disabled kids. Can we opt out of our bill to pay that? In my case, it's like $30-something a bill, and
So we have a couple of billing experts who are here tonight, and I'll direct them after presentation, or you can ask the question towards the end, but as you walk in, they were set up at the front with a table.
Yeah.
Lisa and Shallon, they could help answer that, your specific question, especially as it relates to you or Bill and solar.
It's like anything else, like I don't want my taxes going to something that I don't agree with, per se. And I think that should be an option. Are you willing to contribute to whatever, doesn't know? And then at least that way, it's an option and not some fee that, you know, we don't particularly agree with. Because, you know, I know people that are low income that want to do all that. They purposely don't work because it's not for free. So.
We will, there's a slide in here where we will talk a little bit at a high level, not for your bill specifically, about the portions of the bill that we control versus the portions of the bill that are outside of our direction. So, but I do appreciate your concern. We can go ahead and move to the next slide if you want. I think what we'll do to get started, because we're going to try and ratchet this down a little bit, piggyback off of what some of Kevin said, and drill this down on a more local level. And I think we start by doing a little bit of utility bill 101, and we'll make it quick. There's really two key components to your utility bill. It's your supply and your delivery. As Kevin said, your supply rates are market driven. We don't have any real direct control over them. We do, as Kevin said, engage in some hedging practices to the extent that our regulators of the PSC allow us to, but that's really something that just dampens that volatility. It's not a guarantee of savings or anything. It just really kind of knocks the high points off the peaks and raises the floor from the low end. We do not mark up a profit on these supply prices. It is a pass-through charge that we purchase from the NISO, and we pass it through and pay it to the third-party suppliers of natural gas and generators of electricity. And when we're talking about the spikes that we saw most recently in this past winter, when we're talking about January and February, the supply price spike that we saw was about 80% due to market volatility of margin bills. On the delivery side, delivery is a little bit different. These are the rates that are approved by our regulators at the Public Service Commission. This is the money that goes to cover Central Hudson and other utilities' operational costs, the investments that we have to put in the system, the linemen, the engineers who oversee and repair this system 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. These rates remain fixed, but they are volumetric, which means it's still based on your overall consumption. So it's based on a per kilowatt hour usage, just like your supply charges are. So you will see when you use more, that your delivery charges might ultimately be higher than they were the month before, but that's due to consumption. The actual per kilowatt hour rate doesn't change from month to month. It stays the same over the course of the year, and for your information, Central Hudson's rate years run from July 1st to June 30th. We can go to the next slide, please. This is where the rubber meets the road, is where your money's going. This is a graphic that we put together to really better inform our customers and everyone around us. For every dollar you give Central Hudson, where does it go? We felt like that was an important message to send out. And what you see here, 42 cents for delivery, that's exactly what we just talked about before, the overall operations and maintenance of the system, the running of the company. 42 cents of every dollar you give us goes to that. It goes to financing the system investments that we need to make so that we can continue to provide you safe and reliable electricity and natural gas. 22 cents of every dollar you give us goes to New York taxes, or I shouldn't say New York taxes, taxes in general and New York state policies, I'm sorry. And again, that's where you get into your system benefit charge and your CBC charges and things like that. These are charges that are mandated through our regulator that we have to include on our bills. That is, again, 22 cents, all of that really outside of any directional control from Central Hudson. And then the remaining 36% goes to the suppliers of that electricity and natural gas on average. So this is that for every dollar you spend and give to Central Hudson, 58 cents of it is outside of our control and generally speaking goes to a different entity than Central Hudson. So we can go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about the winter that we faced this year because it was different from what we've seen recently. This 2025-2026 winter, if you felt like your furnace didn't turn off at all for several weeks, you were not imagining it, neither was I. We had one of the coldest winters we've seen in quite some time. The early part of the winter was the coldest we had seen in 15 years. We also had a stretch of 17 consecutive days where the temperature did not get above freezing. And that's the longest stretch we've gone through in this region since the 1930s. So it was really a situation where everyone was using more energy, even when we reached out and said, conserve energy if you can lower your thermostat to 1 or 2 degrees. Consumption was up, and when that happens, we go back to that supply side of the bill where
No. This is not the person. Wait for the questions. Yeah, please. No, let me use one of them.
Wait for the questions at the end.
So again, when we talk about those supply prices, when consumption goes up, that drives up demand. And when demand goes up, those supply prices tend to rise. So we saw lower average temperatures, extreme wind chills, and extended periods of lingering snowpack. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So when we look at the supply prices and what caused them with natural gas, the first thing we look at is infrastructure. The interstate pipeline infrastructure in the Northeast is very different. The truth is no new pipeline infrastructure has been put into New York State since about 1993, but the organic growth in demand for natural gas in the state has continued on. So there has been constraints on the infrastructure side of things. Again, it's organic, it's temperature driven, and as we said, as Kevin said, natural gas is used predominantly for electric generation in downstate New York. What we also saw was something on this slide that you see that's called producer freeze-off. What that is it's quite literally a freezing of the equipment in and around the areas where they procure natural gas from the different basins in Pennsylvania and things like that. And that actually reduced supply in our area by about 11%, which again, when you constrain supply and demand is high, that places upward pressure on both our electricity prices because that's how we're generating it, and our natural gas supply prices because that's how 90,000 customers in Central Hudson heat their homes. Again, with electricity, we do look at the closure of Indian Point. That certainly had an impact on it. And again, when natural gas prices spiked the way they did this winter, 60% of the generation in New York between January 23rd and January 31st was by way of natural gas. We can go to the next slide, please. Now, what you're looking at right here is a summary of my life. I still live on the south side of Poughkeepsie. I'm an electric and natural gas customer, and I live in about a 1,500 square foot home. We figured this was a pretty representative bill. We can also dispel any rumors that Central Hudson employees get any discounts on their bills too. So just to give you comparison, this is my bill from January of 2025 and January of 2026. On the electric side, my bill from 25 to 26 increased by about $46, and 2/3 of that increase was the direct result of my higher usage and the higher supply prices that I had to pay. So the remaining third was due to our new rate plans being put into place. For natural gas, the increase was a lot more drastic because it was such a cold winter. My increase was $115, and 80% of that increase was directly related to my increased consumption and those higher natural gas and supply prices. So you can see that volatility from year over year is a very real thing. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry now. He's going to talk about volatility, number one, in a more focused time frame, more within this year. And then he's also going to, one of the key questions I think a lot of you have here is, what are we doing about it? And he's going to talk about some of the initiatives we have to try to release them. Go to the next slide, AJ.
Thank you. So Joe talked a lot about, higher prices from last winter to this winter, what we saw this past winter. I just want to show, and I'll use this chart to illustrate, the wild swings that customers experience from season to season, and even from month to month. And this example, the average residential customer for Central Hudson saw a 280% swing from October, which is typically a low use period, to this past February, driven in large part by those supply prices that we've been talking about. And I'm a customer, and Joe's a customer. From a customer experience, that instability that you experience in your monthly bills really represents, not just surprise, but a loss of control. And that drives frustration for our customers. We know that as elected officials, you know that because you get those phone calls. And We do communicate, as Joe said, in advance when we see those supply prices rising or are expected to rise. But if someone has their heat at 64 degrees and they're a dad like me running around the house turning every light off, they can only conserve a little bit more. It's really unreasonable to expect people to turn down a thermostat much lower than that. And so we recognize that frustration that customers experience. The other thing is, when you think of it as a homeowner or a renter, your whole portfolio of bills, your car, your rent, your cable, your cell phone, you can budget for those because you know what to expect every month in general. You know, your energy bill is an outlier among all your bills. And, you know, for some customers, it's frustration when they see that large bill come in from month to month. And then for other customers, they have to decide which bill they're going to pay because they just can't afford it. And we'll get into some of the things we're trying to do to mitigate some of those wild swings and make our utility bills less of an outlier compared to all of your other bills. You can go to the next slide. And just keeping with the theme of my friend Joe here, this is his bill. He showed you January to January, I believe. This is his October to February bill. Again, it's just illustrative of the enormous fluctuations that customers experience. His October bill, that's gas and electric, was $360. Last month, 2 months ago, his bill was $814. I remember walking into work and hearing him tell me about it. And I said, well, I just filled up my heating oil tank. It was $1,100. So we had a little debate there about different fuel sources. But I just wanted to share that with you. And then the last slide, AJ, is, as Joe said, so what are we doing about it? You know, we are focused on affordability and also predictability, right? Trying to make bills more stable. On the affordability side, we talked a little bit about rate cases. As a regulated utility, as a monopoly, we have to go to the regulator and say, this is the amount of money we think, amount of revenue we think we need to operate, and then the rates are set from that. We are committing right now, and we've been meeting with elected officials, we are holding our operational and maintenance costs flat as we head to our next rate case. So operational and maintenance costs are things like vegetation management, which is tree trimming, all the costs for the vehicles that we have, all the employee salaries, they will get raises, but we're going to manage the business very tightly to make sure we can come in with a 0% O&M request for our next rate case. Growth and economic development. We have a greater focus that we're putting in place on economic development. We do have some capacity, some headroom in certain parts of our service area where we can site some businesses that will use electricity at a larger amount, which helps spread the fixed cost that we have across a larger pool of customers. That's a benefit to all customers. And then on the predictability side and managing the volatility, as Joe indicated, right now your bill is a function of how much you use. Right, we are trying to, we have an objective to take your bill and have more of a fixed flat rate from month to month. So it's less a multiple of what you use and more just a flat rate. And then budget billing. If you're a budget billing customer, you do pay a flat rate from month to month. But then, you know, sometimes at that 12th month when there's a true up, right? If rates had gone up during the year, if supply charges had gone up during the year, you're hit with a true-up cost, that can be a bit of a jolt. It might be a few $100s, and then you're expected to pay that all at once, plus your regular monthly bill. We want to take that true-up charge and spread it over many future months so that it's more manageable for customers and not a shock during that true-up period. And then I mentioned Shalon and Lisa, our colleagues at Central Hudson who are here tonight. They really manage the programs that are out there for customers who are struggling. The most popular, or at least well-known one, probably is the HEAP program. That's a one-time credit that customers can get during the heating system. If you're a heat customer, that automatically enrolls you in what we call the energy affordability program. It's basically a bill discount every month. And even if you're not a heat customer, you can still qualify for the EAP if you're on things like Medicaid, if you have a veteran's pension or a veteran's survivor's pension, or if you're on SNAP or WIC, you can qualify for the EAP. And then this year, policymakers recognized that wasn't really capturing all the customers that needed that assistance, so they expanded it. So there's an enhanced energy affordability program that was just put into effect a couple of months ago that captures customers up to the median income of the state. And you can actually qualify for a discount program. We can qualify a greater number of customers through that program. So I would encourage those of you who are struggling to at least examine and talk to our people to see whether you might qualify for those programs. There's a Veterans Fund program for veterans who have a DD 214 who are struggling with their bill. You should talk to us. We do have a program that can assist you a couple of times a year. There are funds set aside for that. And then we have what's called a Good Neighbor Fund. There's other programs that I didn't mention, but the Good Neighbor Fund is a fund of last resort that's funded by our shareholders and by customers to help those, again, who don't qualify for programs but still have a demonstrated need. And we can talk to you tonight one-on-one. You can call us, take our number and call us tomorrow if you prefer to do that. But there are options out there for customers who are truly struggling. And I also want to thank the supervisor and assemblyman for having us here tonight. We're happy to take questions and just want to be as accessible as possible.
Great, thank you. Why don't we get a few comments from our forum here, and then we'll open it up to the public. Supervisor?
First of all, thank you, Supervisor, members of the town board, Assemblyman BPAN, our colleagues at Central Hudson. Forums like these are truly important. In the town of Wappinger, how we run our administration is based on education. And the facts and the statistics that came out of these two presentations tonight are always eye-opening for anyone who sees it for the first time. Folks, we need to remember that this is due to the expedited, unrealistic timeline set by the state of New York. That's a fact. CLCPA is not helping this situation. What they have laid out here tonight is a clear roadmap for what the state of New York has expected Central Hudson to do. And again, this is not just Central Hudson. This is NYSEG, this is Con Edison. These are all of these different agencies and companies that provide this commodity are expected to meet these obligations. So I thank Central Hudson for explaining that and making yourselves available to our residents. In the town of Wappinger, we work very hard to ensure an affordable town, as I know the town of East Fishkill does when you're preparing your budget. We work on and look at every single line item to ensure that we keep our towns affordable. And I have to commend Central Hudson for not increasing your O&M budget, because that's almost not realistic. But at the end of the day, again, due to these outside situations, our rates are unpredictable for ratepayers. Very unpredictable. That graph that was just shown here was just stunning. And Joe, thank you for sharing your bill, just to put that in perspective as well. So, from a town of Wappinger perspective, we thank the town of East Fishkill for hosting this forum here tonight. We will continue to work together. Again, this neighborly collaboration here is something that we appreciate, and we will continue to advocate against any additional rate hikes, and again, look at ensuring that our residents, our neighbors, stay in their homes and have an affordable lifestyle. Thank you.
Supervisor, and I appreciate having the opportunity to join forces with the town of Wappingers on this. Thank you, Central Hudson, for coming here and helping to explain this complicated subject for all of us, as well as the ISO representative. And thank you to our supervisor and our assemblyman for arranging this session, and also to Councilman Marinaro, who I know has been very vocal on this subject, and to all the residents that have come out. Clearly, this is a complicated issue, but one that affects all of us, and one that the chickens have come home to roost. This could have been predicted based on a lot of what we've heard and a lot of what we've been reading about. Clearly, the CLCPA is something that needs to be rescinded in my mind. We also need to look at holistic solutions to this, not political solutions. And that means looking at nuclear solutions. I heard mention of 7 new generating projects. I didn't see any new nuclear projects. I hope that's something that's considered in the future. But appreciate the opportunity to learn, to educate, and to hear from our residents as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I agree. We should be on all of the above. Everything should be utilized. Special thank you to all of you coming out tonight. We greatly appreciate that. I especially want to acknowledge the representatives from Central Hudson who have taken a great deal of criticism over the years, particularly on social media. Regardless of where anyone stands, it takes courage to show up, listen, and be part of this difficult conversation. It's incredibly important for people to do their own research on this issue. Too often these debates become one-sided, when in reality, the best decisions come when people hear both perspectives, think critically, and come to their own conclusions. No matter where you fall on the climate bill, the CLCPA, whether you support it or oppose it, I believe we can all agree on one thing. Protecting the environment does matter. It's important for our future and for our generations that will follow us. But there's another reality that we cannot ignore. Our seniors matter too. Right now, many of them are facing utility bills that are rising faster than their ability to keep up. For people on fixed incomes, these increases aren't just inconvenient. They can be frightening. Some are being forced to choose between keeping the heat on, paying for medication, or buying groceries. They should never be in the position we put our seniors in. These are people who built our communities, who raised families here, paid their taxes, and contributed their whole lives. They deserve security and dignity in their later years, not fear every time the next bill arrives. My hope is that our lawmakers in Albany recognize the human reality behind these policies. And I want to commend Assemblyman Beepan. I know he's been fighting hard with this. But adjustments need to be made, whether that means amending the law, refining it, or even reconsidering parts of it, then we should have the courage to do so. Because at the end of the day, some of these seniors have nowhere else to go, and it would be deeply unfair to push them out of the state they've called home for decades, away from their families and their communities, when our responsibility should be finding ways to help them stay. We can protect our environment while also protecting the people who helped build the New York we know today. That balance is not only possible, it's necessary.
I have to commend Central Hudson for showing up and addressing some of these issues. I just want to say to the community, I said it before publicly, that Central Hudson delivers the energy, they do not produce it. They do not plan, their planning into the process is very minimal. I know that we try to avoid talking politics, but at the end of the day, this policy and procedures is one of the same. The only thing that I have to address with Central Hudson publicly today is, please, let's have a better relationship with the community. It is extremely difficult to reach out to representatives of Central Hudson to discuss our local bills. You could be on the phone for hours. I personally don't do that. I ask my wife to call. because she could spend hours while doing other things, waiting for somebody to show up and address the issue. So we do have to have, I would like to see an office, if it's possible, to be opened, where somebody could show up and sit with a representative and actually discuss their bills. If that could be possible, that would be a great effort on your part. I just want to say that I was a child in Italy when my teacher, second grade teacher, started telling us that one day Venice would completely be underwater because of the glaciers melting. I clearly remember this. I just was in Venice 2 years ago, and I walked the street, and I remember what my teacher told me probably 50 years ago. He also said some so-called people that New York City, Manhattan would also be underwater. Well, there is no such thing. Like the previous councilman said, the environment is important. We all know that. But at the same time, we cannot put all our eggs in one basket. And that's what we have done. We have just, our area of the Central Hudson is just being cut off. New York City, and I would ask Assemblyman VPAN to elaborate on this later on. New York City is not feeling the pain as much as we do. The northern zone, because they still have some nuclear power, they don't feel the repercussion of the high bills as much as we feel it over here. It's impossible to do business in this community. There are many people in this community that cannot make the bills, especially a small mom and pop store. And, you know, even the big stores, they're having an issue. This is, I call it a catastrophe. How did I get into this talking about electricity? I found out that few people in our community that I know, maybe about 5 families, they've had their electricity cut off since February 28th. I visited those families, and I've asked them if they need any help. They said, no, we've been paying our bills for 20 years. All of a sudden, they couldn't catch up with their bills to all the reasons that we've been discussing. So they're still working family, but they have no power. I visited them just recently, you know, a few days ago. They still have no power. This is 2026, the town of East Fishkill, Dutchess County, New York. It's animus. When our politicians up north are talking about affordability, they made our lives unaffordable. There is less for us to go to buy pizza. There is less for us to go to a movie, to shop in a local shop, to go for ice cream. These are real issues. We can no longer live under these circumstances. And so this is why we have a forum like this. We hear your pain. I just want to read a quick paragraph. Talked about getting some information. So when Governor Cuomo signed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is difficult for me to pronounce, CLCPA, into law in July of 2019, New York State, as national leader, they were ramping up energy and a broader fight against climate change. In addition to reducing statewide greenhouse gases by 40% by 2030 and 85% by 2050, the law requires that the state obtain 70% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2030. There was talk also shutting down the Poughkeepsie incinerator, which we all use where our collected garbage gets brought up. If that were the case, all your bills will go up. And this is another reason why life is becoming unaffordable for us. We will point fingers at Royal Carter, but at the end of the day, it's not that. It's the New York State that has put some stringent mandates without thinking the consequences of our lives. I mean, right now we have people like many seniors that are retiring in huge numbers, and they want to stay in this community. This is why, for me, it's so important to talk about this. I have said it before, right now, the only people that could change this is the Democrat majority in Albany, Call the Democrats, Assembly and Senate. Make your voice heard, because at the end of the day, if we push, they will listen to us. Also, as I said before, the governor's office, call 518-474-8390. Together, we could win this. It's all about our lives and our communities. Thank you for attending this forum.
So 1984 graduate of John Jay, right? So we're good there. I have a question actually for Kevin, or maybe Central Hudson can answer. We talked about a bunch of different energy sources, but one of the sources we didn't talk about was methane. About 10 or 15 years ago, New York State was pushing the methane generation plants out in western New York. Basically, we have all these garbage-built landfills throughout the state, and you see the white pipes that come out of the ground and they have a little neck. Well, what comes out of that neck is methane. A company out in western New York bought, I think, a dozen methane generators, and they were actually bought the rights to the methane to generate power and put it into the grid. Very, instrumental process. They also found out that the exhaust on the generators could be pumped into a greenhouse, and the plants grew quicker and larger. Do you know anything about the methane and why they kind of slowed down on that type of generation for our state?
I appreciate the question. Unfortunately, I can't get into methane specifically, but what I can tell you is that what Central Hudson has done, somewhat related to that, somewhat adjacent to it, Central Hudson and other utilities have looked into. They've got a bunch of different names for it these days, but one of the names that's most commonly known is certified natural gas, which is, or renewable natural gas, which is natural gas that's a derivative from landfills and agricultural sites and things like that. We've done pilot projects where we've added elements of that into our portfolio and shown promising results. So that's something we continue to look into, but unfortunately, the methane directly, I don't have a good answer for you.
Just, it seems logical that all this garbage is there and methane is there. It's very easy to connect to, but we're looking at things that take long-term, a year, 2 years down the road. Just curious, where that kind of fell off the road there years ago. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank Nick and the town board for co-hosting this with our office. I'm not going to dictate policy at you all because, I'm really here just to listen to your opinions and thoughts, and I wanted you to hear from the folks that our office hears from on a weekly basis. I'm very fortunate to have a good partnership with Independent Systems Operator. They provide us some very, very good information when we take votes on Albany, and I just wish more of my colleagues would join me when we go there for tours and informational updates, because truly it kind of highlights that our grid is at a crisis mode. I can tell you that I don't care which side of the aisle the suggestions and the plans come from. I am for any above all approach that makes energy more affordable for New Yorkers. So I am willing to support any plan that comes forward that brings down those costs overall for New Yorkers, and that's how I will continue to vote in Albany. I'm not going to get into policy specifics right now because I know that you all definitely have questions for Central Hudson, and I want to thank them for being here and for choosing to do these events. We actually started with our first one about 3 years ago in my office, and I don't know if you've been to my office, it's very small. And we probably met with about 75, 80 constituencies in that one short 3-hour block, and it was very helpful. And I thank you all for doing these continuously across our district as well. We just did one of these with NYSEG today, also over in Beekman, and we had about 100 people come through and ask individual questions. And I know you're going to have the ability to do that after this. So thank you all for being here, and I will turn it over to you all in the audience. So. Questions?
Does anybody have any questions?
Together. I appreciate that. They're not being political, that would probably be a little bit more informative. My question is for Central Hudson. When you talk about the true-up, so typically,
oil companies true up in May. So would the true up be moving forward then? So going to the subsequent months, is that correct? Is that how you do the true up?
Just to make sure I understood you correctly, you're asking if we were to make those alterations to our budget billing, would the balance from your true up be spread out over the...
Let's say the future months, basically. So that's in addition to the regular budget. And the next, actually, question I have, the programs you mentioned are fabulous. We publish them to get them out. I'm going to contact the office so that I can actually get some information for individuals that I talk to. Hope that Central Hudson would allow me to get access to the type of programs.
No, please do. We appreciate that. To that end, we have thousands of customers who are enrolled in this program, but we believe that there are thousands more who qualify and are not enrolling in this program. We encourage everyone to take advantage of it. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone on the stage for putting this together. It really helps to listen to all of these issues. Thank you, Gina. I do have a question for Central Hudson. There's a lot of volatility in the cooler times of the year with the electric, the gas. Is it more on the gas side or the electric side? And the concern that I have is there's many communities that are passing policies right now and are building new construction that is not permitted to connect to natural gas. They're requiring them to have only electric heat in their construction. And one of the concerns that I have with that is eventually when that catches up to the electric grid, it's going to be a real problem. And I mean, if the solution is push more people off natural gas because it's going to help stabilize, that's great, but I don't know that our grid can handle it. Is there, where do you stand on communities and organizations pushing these type of policies? Has somebody looked at the end result of what are we going to call? If we just shut down natural gas for all new construction, in 10 years, we're going to have a really big problem with delivering electricity across New York State.
Yeah, and I appreciate the thoughts and your concern. There is legislation that says that no new construction can be connected to natural gas. I think that's still in effect. That's not one that under 7 stories, and there's a lot of carve-outs with that, but it's something that we're certainly concerned with. As we said, we serve 90,000 customers who are on natural gas. Do we have what's known as latent capacity on our system, on the electric system, which is basically just the bandwidth to convert some customers over in certain areas? Yes. A wholesale on a short timeline conversion would raise concerns. It's something that we feel right now in New York, folks still have a choice on how to heat their homes. We support that, and we supported all of the above approach to reducing emissions and making sure that we can maintain safe and reliable service, because that's really our number one priority. We are very honestly energy agnostic. We don't really have a dog in the fight as to how that energy is made. We want to make sure that there's enough of it to keep your lights on and keep your houses warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And the volatility, I think your first question, that's yes, on the electric and gas side, we see that quite large volatility. Part of that is driven, I think Joe or Kevin had mentioned, in downstate New York, 90% of our electricity is generated by natural gas. So, especially in those periods where the gas is needed to generate electricity, and businesses and residents using a large quantity of gas to heat their homes, you're seeing the electricity prices rise, which contributes to that volatility also.
And that's my point. My understanding is a few years back, Con Edison stopped allowing people, there was a moratorium on natural gas in Westchester. I don't know if that's still in effect, but it's causing a real problem. I mean, we're pushing people back and forth between that based on policy, and sometimes it's not even a state policy. There's some communities right here in Dutchess that took it upon themselves to enact these policies on a local level. Who knows what implications it's gonna have on the state level. And all the while, every swing costs everybody a lot of money. It's the volatility in the market that's causing a lot of these problems. You know, if we had the energy and it's stabilized all year round, I don't think we have the issues that we have. We're letting everybody go in different directions, and then everybody's wondering why the bills are swinging. It's really, I don't know, just needs some sort of stabilizing of our energy policies in New York State, and not just from passion and wanting to save the environment. I mean, look at the debates that go on with the wind out in the ocean. You know, you have this renewable energy that you would think that everybody could get on board, and then you put it in the wrong place, and somebody can see it from their beach house, and all of a sudden we're shutting that down. So it's a real problem.
Hello, thank you guys for organizing this and giving us the chance to have our voices heard. So one of the things that the guy from ISO mentioned was predictability and unable to predict demand. Is there anything that maybe Central Hudson or you guys are thinking about as an initiative to improve analytics, thus improving predictability and being able to predict where demand is going to be higher or lower?
So I just want to briefly answer that question. And it's a very common question. It's a matter of supply and demand. If in East Fishkill there is only one store that sells gas, that store could predict the price of that gas to be sold to the general public. This is what happened in this community. Governor Cuomo in 2019 enacted the Green Energy Act. In 2021, they shut down the port. That created a high demand, okay, in the community as far as electricity is concerned. We do not have to be scientists to exactly know what's going on here. Not only they did that, but they also decreased the production of energy in other ways. That also has created an additional demand. Right now, and I'm sure Central Hudson could confirm that. Like ISO just mentioned before, our energy supply comes from down south. And the predictability of those lines being frozen in the future, it happened this year. Could happen maybe in another 10 years, could happen next year. Nobody can point fingers and say for sure where we're going to go from here. The bottom line is that we need to produce cheap energy for our community. They shut us down all of a sudden without planning for the future. That is where the problem lies.
I think to address, I think what you're asking about is sort of those demand spikes that we see when it gets really cold and really hot. And you see fluctuations on your bill. To that end, predicting weather is always a tricky business. There's successful weathermen who have a worse batting average than Aaron Judge. So it's a tricky one. But what I can tell you is that, again, we mentioned it before, we do hedge. So we do everything we can to the maximum extent that our regulators allow us to dampen that volatility on the supply prices that you see on your bill. So we certainly work those functions and pull those levers to the greatest degree possible. And we did that in this past winter. Our hedging practices, I believe in February, when we saw the greatest supply spikes, saved our customers more than $20 million. So they're certainly effective, but they can only do so much. And I think to Jerry's point, when he spoke to before, when you talk about that bottom line number on your Central Hudson bill, that number that's in that green bar, to really reduce that volatility, it's going to take a village. We need to work with our regulators and arrive at a solution where, again, what we're advocating for is making your bill less dependent on how much you use and make it behave a little bit more closely to the bills you typically see, like your cable bill or your car payment, where there's more of a fixed charge so that you have a better understanding from month to month about what your bill might look like.
Hi. My last question, I promise. So the CLCPA is basically surrounding itself around renewable energy, you know, the Clean Air Act. And I think the reality is that we can't do it. We just can't do it without putting us out, you know, basically filling our pockets. And I think what me having solar, I know when there's snow on my solar panels, I'm not getting any sun. Even if the sun's out for like a whole week, it's cold, but sunny all week, it's not melting. So unless they have a solution to taking the snow off the solar panels, you know, maybe that could be another job creation, I don't know. They got to come up with an alternative, like, okay, you know, solar's not working right now. Let's use, you know, again, I know there's closed right now, reopen it and just use it sparingly whenever we need it. In times, maybe during winter, use an alternative. Because to say we're only going to do this, we're only going to use solar. Solar is based on the sun, wind is based on the wind, hydro is based on water, which in the north is, I don't think it works because it's frozen. You know, it's very weather. So unless something's constantly working all the time, there you go, batteries, something like that where, you know, maybe people who have solar get free batteries or something that can be an alternative to, okay, it's not working. I pay $333 a month for solar, that's great. And the rest of the year I'm paying, what used to be $60, God only knows what it'll be in a year now. So to say, well, you should go solar, you should do this, you should do, is unrealistic because you have to have alternatives. You know, like when it's going to be cold, I tell my daughter, you can't wear short sleeves, you have to wear this. You have to have alternatives. You can't just say, well, you're wearing this no matter what. Or you're doing this no matter what. We're going to say you're doing this and you're not going to have gas houses should not be just gas or all electric. Because again, when prices go high, now you're stuck to just electric. So there needs to be, and this is like a political thing, to promote to these politicians that you need to have as many alternatives as exist. Because to sit there and say you cannot have gas, or you cannot have this, or you have to have solar, is unfair to the consumers. It's unrealistic due to nature, because no one's God and no one's a weatherman, so we can't predict what the weather's going to be. And you can sit there and say, yeah, you need to have solar, but when the snow's on the solar panels, it doesn't work. And the bills go high, and so now you're paying solar and electricity. All right? So there's got to be a bunch of more alternatives than what we already have. Somebody's got to come up with something new. I don't know.
Just want to say thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. Really appreciate this. Kevin had mentioned earlier about the feasibility of maintaining our existing, aging, falling apart grid structure. Of course, because it's, the maintenance and upkeep of that makes sense. Makes sense. It's there, it's connected, as he said, and I totally agree with that. What is, or how is, our existing equipment old, aging, and failing more and more commonly? How is that being treated? When it fails, is it outright abandoned? Or is it being maintained? Is it being repaired? Is it being kept in service as much as possible while we make our transition? My concern is that for a policy, when it fails, leave it dead. It doesn't have to be. Does anyone know? I know this is probably more of a question for Kevin, but I was just wondering if anybody knows.
Yeah, that is a little bit more on the generation side. I can speak to, from us being the delivery system for your electrons and your natural gas, we are constantly investing in our system. we are constantly replacing aging infrastructure. That is one of the primary drivers when we do go in for these rate reviews, when we go in for these requests where we talk to our regulators at the Public Service Commission and say, you know, this is the money we need in order to continue to operate the business. One of the most significant drivers we have is that aging infrastructure. You know, replacing old copper lines, replacing those old wooden poles that have reached the end of their useful life. It's not just adding upgrades and adding capacity, which is something we do as well. It's sometimes just the simple fact of replacing poles and wires, replacing the natural gas system. We replace 15 miles of natural gas main every year by order of the Public Service Commission. So we absolutely view that responsibility to replace the delivery system and of aging infrastructure very seriously. It's our number one priority, keeping it safe and delivering reliable service to our customers. But again, on the generation side, when we talk about that aging generation fleet, that's a question by our left for Kevin. And that's it.
Thank you.
Just another additional information. So the delivery part of the bill, as we saw from the chart, is about 2 times what your consumption of electricity is. And a lot of that money is going to subsidize non-renewable energy. So a lot of the people that are in this community right now, and to me, it's not my decision for somebody to put solar panels, drive an electric car, or whatever form of energy you want to use. But for somebody who's a retired senior to subsidize it and be forced to pay for those charges is really something that is unaffordable.
Thank you so much for being here today. The question I had to do with your ability to regulate the demand for electricity at peak times. So I'm talking about, 5 o'clock in the evening, everybody comes home, everybody turns on their air conditioner at the same time, or everybody turns on their stoves at the same time, and electricity peaks, which often means that we have to fire up our peak-up plants to put more electricity into the grid, which usually causes a spike in prices. A lot of other utilities offer this thing called the virtual power plant, so to be able to connect your smart devices into it. So thereby, you could potentially see some lowering in prices. I was wondering whether you at Central Hudson are planning to provide that facility to us here at Dutchess?
I appreciate the question. It's a good one. I will tell you that what you're talking about is something that we call demand-side management, right? And so at a high level, what we do when we see long periods of either cold weather or hot weather is we try to communicate to the best we can with our customers, whether it's through the media, my end, text messages. If you signed up for our text message alerts, which if I can put a plug in for that, please do. You'll get updates on our outages and everything like that. Best way to communicate with us. But so we do try and reach out to our customers when we see periods of extreme weather. When you talk about those demand side management type of initiatives, we've looked at them and we continue to look at them. What we've found is the ones that we've sort of investigated up to this point, while they show some promise to the folks who participate in them, the ultimate cost of them borne by the other ratepayers would be significant as well. So we have to make sure that we're balancing the benefits for those who participate versus the entirety of the customer base that would have to pay for those initiatives. So it's something that we're very interested in and we continue to look at, but at this time we haven't found one that we feel benefits the entirety of our customer base.
Yes, hello. Councilman Marinello has now twice said that the bill includes a portion for delivery charges that is 3 times higher than the actual cost of the energy delivered, and that's going to support renewable energy. I thought I saw in one of your donut graphs that it was actually more like 50-50. Could you please give us the true story on what that proportion is?
Yeah, I can certainly talk to that. That dollar bill graphic that we showed you is a little bit of a different breakdown. It's not a direct breakdown of delivery versus supply. So we refer to it as delivery as 42 cents of every dollar the customers give Central Hudson, and that is what we use to operate the business. That tax portion, the 22 cents, a huge portion of that is also baked into your delivery charges. So that's not broken out in the tax portion of your bill. That is also in your delivery charges, along with the state fees and surcharges like the system benefit charge and things of that nature. So, it varies because your supply prices vary from month to month. Right now, I would say that your bill is probably pretty close to 50-50 or maybe 60-40 in terms of 60 being your delivery charges and 40% being your supply charges. But again, it's when we talk about those delivery charges, it's important to note that in its entirety on your bill, there's a significant portion of those delivery charges that Central Hudson is not in control of. It includes taxes, fees, surcharges, and things like that. So it depends on the month based on our supply charges, to be honest with you.
Any other questions? Yep.
Thank you for all being here tonight. I think all of us appreciate you being here. My question is about proportionality. What we know is that when the price of oil goes up, oil companies make more money than they've ever made before. And I think what you were trying to say is that you have a delivery charge that is currently based on the kilowatt hours delivered, but you're going to be changing that model to be based on more of a fixed cost?
That's the hope. It's something that we need to work again with our regulators with. There's no decisions we can make in terms of how we function without the Public Service Commission sort of giving it their blessing. Right now, your bill is, and Joe, I think you mentioned this, your bill right now is about 80% based on your consumption, it's volumetric, and 20% fixed. We'd like to move that to a larger portion of it being fixed and a smaller portion of it being volumetric. But to your point, with the profit, Central Utility, I think this is an important point, and I'll try real hard not to get too in the weeds on this. Utilities in New York State do not make money off of how much you use. The shareholders for your utilities in New York State get a return on their investment for the investments we make in keeping the system safe and reliable for you. There's actually a line item on your bill you can look at that says RDM. RDM stands for Revenue Decoupling Mechanism, which means when we have an extremely cold winter and customers use more than we had anticipated in our forecast, we actually have to issue a small credit to make sure that we're not collecting more money than we agreed to collect.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Assemblyman Vipan for joining us tonight and partnering with us to have this forum. And thank you to Wappinger Central Schools for allowing us to have the school for this forum. The town board, of course, and Supervisor Cavassini from Wappinger. And thank you to Sherry and Joe from Central Hudson for answering all the questions. And as they indicated earlier, there are people in the lobby from Central Hudson to answer any specific billing questions you might have. So please utilize their expertise if you have them. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for all your questions. I think that we've got a lot of information. Like we said, it's a very important topic, very volatile, and important because it comes out of our pockets, right? And folks, listen, I don't care, as the Assemblyman said earlier, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. We want to spend less than as much as we can, right? We want to keep as much money as we can. So at the end of the day, we work hard on this town board to manage every dollar that the taxpayers give us to manage the town and operate on your behalf. And that should be no different from any other elected official. So please voice your concerns. You know who to call, you know where to knock, what doors to knock on. So please do so. Voice your opinions. It's important to do so because at the end of the day, it's your money that's going to be leaving your pocket faster. So I appreciate everyone for coming out. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.